Most people think that persuasion is about convincing people, but it's actually not about convincing people. What if I told you it was about making connections? Today's guest has spent over a decade of really studying how people make decisions. And he's here to show us how and why the best persuaders really aren't the loudest people in the room. They're probably going to be the most rational people in the room. So my guest today is Josh Bandoch, and he is a persuasion expert. Okay. So I love this. Let's talk about persuasion. He is a TEDx speaker and a policy advocate. Let me tell you that he's also an author of the book called How to Get What You Want, Mastering the Art and Science of Persuasion. He has mined this topic through psychology, neuroscience, economics. He's written speeches for government officials on this, and he is a think tank leader. And I love that. I love think tank leaders because they're just so smart. So I can't wait to dive into this topic today. And so he communicates about policies on issues. He talks about policy and poverty, social mobility, and education. So that's quite interesting. So I just want to welcome you, Josh. I can't wait to dive into persuasion.
Zelda, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here, and I think we're going to have a great conversation today.
Absolutely. So what got you into this topic and this industry?
The difference between having a good idea and having other people embrace that idea is persuasion. And we're doing persuasion all day, every day, with our friends and our family, whether you work in policy or you work in real estate, or you're just talking to your kids. I have to persuade my kids all day, especially Thomas. He's 3, lots of persuasion there. So it's all day, every day. And a big motivator of this book and this project and interest in persuasion is that in my previous life, I was an academic, lots of super smart, high IQ people. Now I have the honor of working in the public policy space again, lots of super smart, high IQ people. And not only is that not enough, but somehow lots of these super smart people, they're just not persuasive. And I just kind of wonder, well, what's going on? Because if persuasion were all about data and logic and reason, then, like, ta-da. And I've come to realize both through tons of research and tons of practice that persuasion doesn't quite work how we think it does. And I've tried to unpack those secrets. And if you can marry your high IQ or even just an average IQ with really high emotional intelligence, which is what's at the heart of persuasion, you can crash through that glass ceiling that is otherwise capping what you're achieving in your professional and your personal lives. So that's the motivation. Help people crash through their glass ceilings.
I think that's spot on. So you say that persuasion isn't about being right, and it's about making a difference, right? So that's a powerful shift. How or what does that look like in a real conversation?
Yeah, well, so the framing is so important because I think throughout each and every day, in every interaction with somebody, we're faced with a decision. Do I want to be right? Or do I want to make a difference? Being right is really easy. You send the text, the email, the tweet, whatever it is that you do, and you're right, and it feels so good, and it doesn't matter what the other person thinks. It doesn't matter how they experience it because, they'll either see that you're right or they won't, and that's their problem. And making a difference, that's a totally different enterprise because it's about long-term building great relationships, connections, success through connections, right? It's about building long-term relationships with people and getting what you want time after time after time. And part of the trouble is that being right, we think, is all about our logic and our reason. And if people would just see things our way, then, if they would just open their eyes, that they would see things the way that we see them. The trouble is that there's only one person who thinks just like you. And that's you. That's it. And I don't even agree with everything that I did yesterday. So 2 of the most common misconceptions of persuasion, you kind of alluded to them. One is that persuasion is about winning. It's like, in a deal, I'm going to win. Well, Zelda, if I win against you, what does that make you?
Yeah. I don't want to be the loser.
A loser, right? And when someone makes you feel like a loser, do you want to work with them? No. And then we also think persuasion is about convincing someone to think like us. The problem with that starts with the Latin root of the word convince, which actually means to vanquish or to conquer. Conquest is barbaric. It's not persuasive. So I think persuasion is shared action. It's shared because it's something that we voluntarily do with others. And it's action because it's about getting things done. And that mindset of shared action is about making a difference versus being right, which anyone can be right, right? Just send the text, send the email, and then move on with life.
Yeah. So, people think that when you're talking about being right and I've got to win, it's like people think that they have to win with all these, with their arguments with facts. It's like, here's all the data, here's this and here's that. And actually, I believe that probably pushes people away, wouldn't you say?
110%. And initially, this was really frustrating for me because in my previous life, I was an academic. I did the PhD thing, and I was like, wow, isn't it just better arguments and better reasoning? And I saw somehow, the peer review process in academia, you submit things and then other people, you don't know who they are, review your work. And somehow you could send the same article and two people could review it for the same journal. One could say, this is the best article I've ever read on this topic. And the other one could say, this is the worst article I've ever read on this topic. Well, what's going on here? And I kind of intuitively started to see, wait a minute, persuasion isn't all about logic and reason. In fact, this is how everybody's brains are wired. Yours, mine, all 8 billion of us. We feel first, then reason. Sometimes it's feel, but reason. Sometimes it's feel, then reason. Sometimes it's feeling. We never get to reasoning. I've been there. You probably have too. I definitely have. And what that means, and the former academic in me hates this, is that persuasion starts with feelings. And we also know that people who tragically suffer brain damage and their ability to emote is impaired, their reasoning is impaired. So what all of this means is that the logic first, data, reason, all that stuff, when you lead with that, that's actually illogical because it's not how our brains are wired. So you have to start with feelings, and that means two things. That means understanding how your counterpart is feeling, because if they're in a good mood, now could be the perfect time to engage. If they're in a bad mood, maybe not because of anything you did, maybe now's not a good time to ask them for something. And then you have to think about, okay, what feelings do I need to generate in my counterpart to, essentially make persuasion possible or to make it happen?
And maybe to persuade people to your way of thinking or to think a little different or what have you. It's first of all, understanding what's asking them the right questions as to find out where they're coming from so that you can put your narrative together to persuade them. Is that far off?
Oh, that is so spot on. So one of the troubles is that our wiring kind of works in funny ways. And part of it is that we're wired to feel first, but we think first. So there's another part of the wiring I'm going to press on now, maybe with a story. A couple of summers ago, I had an intern, John, and a smart kid, nice kid, and goes to a good school. And John thought that the best way to show how awesome he is, right? Great. Look at me, was to wave his hand around, to talk a lot, say, hey, call on me, even to the point where he was interrupting colleagues, interrupting me because he just had to showcase how smart he was, right? Talk first. That makes sense because that's how we're wired. We're wired to think about ourselves and to tend to our own needs. Because if I don't tend to my own needs, who's going to? And talking about ourselves even feels good. It generates the same feelings in our brain as sex and money. So we adopt what I call a me first mindset. It's not persuasive. So I kind of had to take John aside one day and I said, maybe that interrupting thing, do you like people interrupting you? And he was like, ah. And he started to transform over the summer in a really amazing way where he started to put the team first and put what we needed first rather than just making it all about John. Oh, that was funny. One day he came in and he said, guess what happened last night? And I said, what's that? He said, well, I was talking to my girlfriend and she started telling me about a problem she was having with her internship. And I just started talking and she said, why can't you just listen? And then the light bulb went back off and he was like, oh, okay, zip it, listen. Then he said, okay, I listened for a little bit. Then I started to ask her some questions to better understand what she was experiencing. And then I started asking questions about how she thought she could solve that problem. So the key to persuasion, the foundational rule, is that actually you have to put them first. You have to put them first. Even though we're wired to put ourselves first, you put them first. You understand them. You listen. You appeal to the things that they care about. And then when you do that, that unlocks shared action time after time. Like if you're in real estate and you're trying to sell somebody a property and you tell them all of your reasons why they think they should buy that property, that could be so far away from their reasons for buying that property. You're like, oh, the schools are great. And they're like, I don't have kids. Well, right. Who cares how good the schools are? If you understand what they're looking for, what they care about, and you put that front and center, that's going to persuade them, not what you care about.
Yeah. It's all about the clients. To me,
100%.
what do they want? What motivates them? Why are they moving? And what do they want? You know, they're all going through a transition, just like your guy, John. He went through a transition there of interrupting and waving his arm to get the attention and learning how that's not the best way to do it, especially with a girlfriend.
And the best part about John was that he really did transform. And
yes, I can see. Yeah.
by
That's
the end of the summer, he was outperforming all the other interns, and we offered to keep him on and give him a promotion, something that we didn't offer to anybody else because he always, at the end of the summer, was putting what we needed first as an organization. It was so powerful. He did a complete 180, and it was so awesome to see.
So that's the key there, is to put the person in front of you first, listen to them before so you know where you're coming from. Maybe you don't need to persuade them to do anything because maybe they were already there. You don't know.
And that's the beautiful thing. If you invite somebody to talk and you listen, maybe you say, how do you want to proceed? The alternative would be for you to tell them how you think they should proceed. But if you say, how do you want to proceed? And then you just listen, they're going to offer some ways to proceed, some of which you're going to find really appealing. Maybe some things you didn't even know that they were willing to do. You're like, oh, whoa, they'll do that. That's amazing. And then you say, oh, okay, well, 5 of those 7 things. Yeah, that all sounds great. And okay, I can do those 5 things if you can do this one other thing that you weren't even in a position to ask for. But now you've said, okay, I can do those 5 things for you. Can you just give me this one thing? Whereas if you had led with that one thing you wanted, or those 3 things you wanted, maybe you wouldn't get any of them, but now you're getting 6.
I do that in real estate often. When I'm showing a home for a buyer, I'll ask them to tell me while we're still in the house looking, because I'm showing them several, tell me what you loved about this house. And then I'll turn it around saying, now tell me what you don't like about the house. Yeah. And then I'll actually have them rate it 1 to 5 so that we're comparing apples to apples at the next house that we look at. And I make sure that I'm checking the boxes of what they don't want, what they do like, and things like that. It's like this house, all the rooms are too small. Okay. Yeah. Or there's not enough closet space, or there's this or that, or there's no fence, things like that. Yeah. So it makes my job easier. I don't have 100%. To really convince them. I know what they want. So here it is.
You're saving time. You're not showing them 5 other properties that don't fit. That's your time. And you're demonstrating understanding of their wants and needs. Something else that you might just, give a little go would be to ask them how they feel about a house. Because since we feel first, you just say, how do you feel about this place? As opposed to, what do you think? Because since we feel first, when you ask that question, it triggers a totally different, intuitive, quick, authentic response. And if you say, like, how'd you feel about this? And they say, oh, this is great. I love it. You're like, okay, they like this. As opposed to, well, it was okay.
I love how you say that, because it's, a house is a very emotional buy. Yeah, it's all about the dollars and cents too, but there's a lot of emotion. And so asking people how they feel, and that's persuasion to me, is just what you said, which is maybe it's just adjusting a word.
Absolutely.
It's like I've learned to take out of the word is, here's my opinion. Yeah. Instead of saying, this is my opinion, I now say, well, it's like my perception. So it's just adjusting those words instead of, what do you think? I love that. How does it make you feel? I'll be using that one.
Give it a go. How'd you feel about this property? And words matter, and even just tone matters, because even if you get the words, quote unquote, perfect, if you don't deliver it with the right tone, if I say, Zelda, that's a great idea, as opposed to, Zelda, that's a great idea. Same words, tone totally different. Yes. Totally different. One was excited and one was scornful. Same words.
So where do you see people unintentionally damaging relationships when they're trying to persuade someone?
I think a couple of things go wrong. We've already talked about two of them, which is that they adopt a me first mindset. You've got to put them first. So them first mindset. Another is that they try to put their logic front and center. And sometimes they even launch what I call logic tsunamis, which of course, the best way to, to have somebody persuade you is for them to soak you with a logic tsunami. Another trap that we fall into is that we get too negative about things. And we are wired to be negative. We have something called negativity bias. And if you look around, it seems crystal clear obvious that negative feelings are persuasive. Like, look at the news, right? The trouble is, if I'm going to put you on the spot for a second here, sorry, who are some of the most persuasive Americans of the 20th century or of the last 100 years? Intuitively, like anybody come to mind, you're like, oh, this person was really persuasive.
Yeah. I think of the books that I've read because I like to read a lot. And so those books, some of those authors, some of the things that they say, they really resonate with me personally. How about you?
Well, I mean, if I think about really public figures, I might say JFK or Martin Luther King Jr. or Ronald Reagan. And JFK said, ask not. And Martin Luther King had a dream, and Ronald Reagan saw America as a shining city. So some of the most effective political leaders that we've ever had in this country and what the world has ever had, they were positive. And how do you generate positive feelings? You have to be for something. So although we are wired to be negative and we fall into that trap, be for something. So when you're selling somebody a home, right, it's like, what are they for? And make sure that the house is has these things and be for those things. Maybe they really want great public schools. Great. Okay. Put that front and center. How does this align with that? The other thing that I think, fall into is sometimes, especially in a numbers industry, whether it's policy or real estate or anything else, we focus too much on the numbers and we forget that human beings are story processors. And because we're story processors, you have to start with stories.
I agree.
You have to start with stories. So you might even just, invite your audience to tell some stories, because whatever stories they tell you are going to reveal so much. That's why even when I'm interviewing somebody for a job, the very first question I ask them, I say, what's your story? Boom, it tells me so much about that person. So when you want to try and sell something, you have to have some stories that show essentially somebody going on that journey that you want the person, in this case your client perhaps, to go on, where they had this happy ending. You can't only show them the data and think, yeah, that's going to get the job done.
No, yeah, you're right. And I just had this conversation with another podcast that I did recently. It was like, it's not all about the data. It's like, and all the logistics. It's about the conversations you had. I always say, get to know the client or get to know the person you're going to be speaking with, whatever it is. I mean, there's so much information on the internet now. You can learn tons about people. Yeah. So go into it knowing maybe what the angle is. Be strategic about your conversations when it comes to 100%. Business. Be strategic.
And one thing I unpack in the book is how to tell the most persuasive stories, because at some level,
that's important.
Your listeners aren't going to be surprised here. Oh, okay, stories are powerful. What kinds of stories? So I dive into that.
Tell us more about the book. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the book.
Yeah, well, so the book is about mastering the art and the science of persuasion, what it is and how it works. So part one goes into adopting what I call the persuader's mindset. And at the heart of that is that you have to put them first. And I think that when you get that mindset right, even so many of your quote unquote errors are forgiven, because you are genuinely connecting with somebody. You are growing authentic relationships. And when you are authentically connected to somebody else, and if they say something not quite the right way, it's okay. Right. And if they don't get if they don't fully understand where you're coming from, that's fine, because you like them and you trust them. And when they demonstrate understanding of you, that's powerful. If someone demonstrates understanding of you, even if you disagree with them, because they've understood you, you're at least less inclined to resist them. And you might be inclined to maybe, give them a little bit more of what they want, because they understand you, because people oftentimes just need to feel heard. So the first part of the book really dives into like how you adopt this mindset and how you craft a vision, because like part of what you need when you're putting them first, really big pictures, is to understand what their vision is or something, whether it's for their home and where they're going to move, the kind of life they want to live, or whether it's just personally, what's their professional vision for themselves? What are they trying to achieve? And then part two goes into the psychology of persuasion, because I think that you have two options. You can either ignore the cognitive realities of this thing up here, the human brain, and see what happens. And that's not a recipe for success. Or you can understand and learn to navigate those cognitive realities. So that's what I dive into in part two of the book. That's why you have to start with feelings, what feelings you should generate, which are positive feelings, how you appeal to somebody's values, because when you either appeal to positively or negatively somebody's values, when you offend somebody, right? Like that is a great way to either persuade them or to push them far away.
Yeah.
Exactly. The third part, which I think will be of a little more interest to your listeners based on, the audience, is the sort of tactical side of persuasion, like some of those like in the weeds things you can do. So I have a chapter on negotiation. And I think a couple of the insights here that are probably most helpful. We think that persuasion is, I'll sort of share two insights. The first is that we think persuasion is about getting somebody to do something. I've come to understand that more than that, persuasion is about identifying barriers, what's stopping somebody from doing something, and then removing that barrier. Because if that barrier isn't dislodged, then they're not going to move forward in the way that you want them to. So like if you are hoping somebody will, say, work with you as their representative, or you want them to buy something, you have to understand what's stopping them from doing that. So you simply ask somebody, what would stop you, or what is stopping you from this? And rather than saying, hey, why aren't you doing this? You just say, what's stopping you? And they give a quick, intuitive, unguarded answer. And then it's your job to remove that barrier. So if you're trying to get somebody to work with you so you can represent them, you say, well, what would stop you from working with me and having me represent you? They might say, well, I just, there's this other person who's like, they're close friends with a friend of mine and I kind of feel committed to them. Okay. Or they might say, well, I just want to make sure that you really understand what I'm looking for. Whatever it is, those are totally different things that are stopping that person. The other thing is that human beings, we are extremely sensitive to losses. In fact, losses sting 5, maybe 10 times as much as corresponding gains. So like if I take $100 from you to make you feel whole again, I have to give you like $500 or $1,000. What that means for persuasion as a negotiating tactic is to frame things in terms of losses. So instead of saying to somebody, say, well, don't you want to get this property? You might say, well, do you want to lose out on this property? And that triggers a different kind of thing. I don't want to lose this property. So, okay, well, maybe I have to act with a little bit more urgency.
And in the housing market, I call that strategic. And that just happened to me. It was like, okay, believe it or not, in this day and age, there are still some multiple offers. And it was a house that was perfect for my buyer and the price was right. We put in an offer. Then I hear that there's some other offers. So I said, okay, we need to do a little strategy here. So I did a few things tricks up my sleeve and she got the house. It wasn't tricky about it. It was like we did an escalatory clause, which people don't use that much anymore because you don't need to, but we did.
Right,
and she got this contract. And so, yay.
Right. Well, and one of the good things about that is then you have stories. So maybe next time that somebody is like, well, do we really need to have an escalatory clause? You say, well, let me tell you about another client of mine.
Tell you about the other client.
And if we hadn't had that clause, we wouldn't have gotten this. And
now, but let me interrupt you for a second.
Please.
So one of the things though is I like the DISC personality test. Okay. And so I have clients sometimes that are that high C, those analytical types. Those are the most difficult for me because I'm not a high C.
Yeah.
How do you persuade these people who are really about the facts and the figures? How do you persuade them to do something that is in their best interest?
Absolutely. And what you're
the same thing, stories?
Well, so what you're pressing on is extremely important. Big picture, people are different, right? We have different personalities, whether you like the disc or like the big five personality, whatever it is, right? These are all like, they press on real things. People are different. So you got to know that. And part of emotional intelligence is that you're dealing with individuals. So I would say a couple of things. One is that still on average, everything that I talk about in the book, that we feel first, stories, all that kind of stuff, that applies because that's true for human beings. So unless the clients you're talking about are alligators or elephants, there are some alligators down in Florida, but they probably aren't your clients. So this stuff works on human beings. What I would then say is, okay, on top of that, if you know that somebody really is a numbers person, there are people like that out there, then you do have to appeal to that in a way that, somebody else might not. So you would still want to ask questions like, how do you feel about this? They'll kind of let you know. And then I would ask them, well, what's stopping you from moving forward? And then they would say something like, well, I need to see the numbers. Boom, there you go. Show them the numbers so that it works for them. Or they might say, well, it's just, I'm hoping that interest rates come down. It's like, what numbers exactly? And what are they waiting for? Because maybe interest rates aren't coming down anytime soon. Then you say, well, do you want to lose out on this property? Waiting for interest rates to come down. And if they're a numbers person, you do need to have more numbers available than you would for maybe the average.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. So was there a moment, Josh, in your life that where understanding about persuasion changed everything for you?
Yes. I think the switch really flipped for me when I was doing fundraising for a nonprofit. And actually, I'll tell two quick little stories where it was like, this is really the origins of that first chapter of the book. Put them first. I was meeting with a guy in Wisconsin, sitting in his office, in his house, met for about 90 minutes. And he talked like 85 or 90% of the time. And new fundraiser thinks, oh my God, I am just totally messing this meeting up because I'm supposed to talk and sell my organization.
Right.
And I'm sitting there looking for ways to get in. This guy just won't stop talking. And at the end of the meeting, I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm such a failure. And then he says, I have such a better idea of what you all do now. And my intuitive response was, no, you don't. And then I was like, wait a minute. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because he feels like he does. So as I flipped the switch, I was like, wait a minute, I got this all backwards. This is really early on. So I was like, this is like 2 months in. Great time to know you have it backwards as opposed to 2 or 3 years in. I started to put them first, and time after time after time, I just understood the supporters of my organization. I put them first. And sometimes that not only led to really powerful, essentially sales results where one guy went from $1,000 to $100,000 in his support for various initiatives. It also helped me form really deep relationships with some people. One person, ended up being one of the most important people ever to enter my life. And that all started because I put him first. We connected. I fulfilled his needs. I understood and met them. And now, like I said, one of the closest people who I'll ever encounter in my life. And I'm so grateful because I put him first and we connected.
That's a great story. I love that. That's so good. So if somebody's listening and they want to perhaps get better at influence and relationships, what's maybe the first steps that they should take?
I mean, obviously buy my book, haha, right?
Yes, no, absolutely.
So,
no, haha.
And what are some of the biggest things you're going to get in the book? You're going to get an understanding of what persuasion really is and how it works, that it's shared action. You're going to get the mindset that if you bring that mindset to every conversation, you're going to get so much more of what you want, not once, but time after time. You're going to learn the psychology of persuasion, verified, validated by one of the founders of emotional intelligence as a field, Peter Salovey, who endorsed the book. This is just how the brain works and how you use that to your advantage to get what you want. And then you're going to get a lot of tactics that especially folks in real estate are, I think, going to be really interested in because they work. So that's what you're going to get in the book. And when you bring these things to every conversation, you're going to authentically connect with people and you're going to get what you want time and time again.
Wow. I love this. So to me, my big takeaway is persuasion is about the words you use. It's listening to the other person so you understand them better and then using your words wisely.
And frame things in their terms.
Yes, absolutely. It's all about the other person.
100%.
Like when you flip the switch with you, that was a great story. It was like, yeah, it's like it doesn't matter. It's what he perceived.
Yeah, look, I mean, think about it this way. Would you force feed a vegetarian veal?
No.
Oh my God, terrible. Or would you force feed somebody who keeps kosher bacon? No, that's so deeply offensive. And it's not right or wrong that they keep kosher. They're vegetarian. So understand who they are and give the vegetarian a delicious salad or like a nice vegetarian Indian korma dish. That's fine. Understand. But then even of those, which ones do they like? Right. So understand your audience and then give them things that appeal to them. Don't give them things that either they just, korma's not my thing, or, oh my God, that's offensive. I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat veal, right? Don't offend your audience. Understand them, appeal to their values, appeal to what they care about. And that's so powerful in part because when someone does that to you, you know how powerful it is.
Yeah, it is powerful. And that's how you win. That's how you
That's
want, you want to win. That's how you win. Absolutely.
right.
So how do our audience members, how do they connect with you when they want to learn more about how to get your book or how to reach you to speak and what have you? How do they connect with you?
Three great ways. Find me on LinkedIn, my name, simple. Go to my website, joshuabandoch.com, JOSHUABANDOCH.com. You can fill out a form there if you're interested to have me speak and whatnot. And then buy the book. It's a great place to start. This is a decade plus of research and practice, all packed into one book that I think is really digestible and it's really actionable for people.
That is great. So I have a signature question. Everybody knows I asked that one question. So I'm going to ask that one to you now, which is, has an opportunity ever presented itself to you because of a connection that you had, or you were able to open the door for somebody else because of someone that you knew that you could open that connection for?
I would say almost every opportunity that I've experienced in life is the result of a connection. Yeah, I mentioned earlier the connections that I formed in fundraising. Yeah, I can think of a recent professional connection where I was invited to participate in a working group. And I really wanted to continue working with some of the people because I think they're wonderful people who do great work in the field. And I knew that the best way to do that was to connect with the organizer. So next day saw her at an event and went over and talked to her and strategically, persuasively
Absolutely. Yeah.
connected with her. I put things in her terms because I knew what she cared about. And I said, I would love to continue. And here's what I think I can bring, framing things in her terms. And she invited me into a really small group of people, tight knit, and working with that group still to this day is an honor and a pleasure. And that would not have been possible if I had not connected with her at that crucial moment on her terms.
That's true. I love that, on their terms. Absolutely. Well, that is our show for today. All to our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. Make sure you hit that subscribe or follow button so that you don't miss a single episode, because every Tuesday we have a new episode of Success Through Connections. And so I'm Zelda Greenberg, your host, and know that next time you hear of someone who's having a conversation about life transitions, I'm the realtor that can help you make smart and strategic moves across the United States. So until next week, remember that success doesn't happen in isolation. It happens because of those conversations and the connections that we make. I'll see you next week on a new episode of Success Through Connections.